All right, let's dive right in. Today we're tackling something huge, the entire story of Western classical music. We're going on a bit of a whirlwind tour, and we're using the amazing classical music book as our guide. And yeah, you're seeing that correctly. We're going to try and cover 1,000 years of music. Think about that, from monks chanting in monasteries all the way to the wild experiments of the modern age. I know, it sounds a little crazy, but stick with me, we're going to connect all the dots.
Let's just be honest for a second. The phrase classical music itself can sound kind of heavy, right? The book even says the whole thing can seem intimidatingly vast. It's easy to get the feeling that it's some kind of exclusive club, and if you don't already know everything, well, you're not invited.
But here's the thing, that's totally wrong. This music was never meant to be some secret for the elite. For 1,000 years, just like this quote says, it was just the soundtrack of life. It's what gave people joy and drama and inspiration.
So let's just forget about any dry, dusty history lesson. Think of this as the story of sound. It's a story about human expression, about how we figured out how to bottle up emotions into melodies and harmonies, and how that art just kept evolving over centuries and centuries of change.
And every good story needs a map, right? Well, here's ours. We've got 6 big eras to get through. We'll start way back in the beginning with early music, move through the rebirth of the Renaissance, get into the grand Baroque and the elegant classical periods, then the super passionate Romantic era, and finally land in the chaos and revolution of the 20th century. So, let's start at the beginning.
In the very beginning, music wasn't for concerts or dancing. It had a much higher purpose. In a world completely dominated by the church, music was a form of worship. It was sung by monks, with no instruments, designed to send prayers up to God, not to entertain anybody down on earth.
But then, things started to change. Little innovations started to creep in. In the 14th century, a style they actually called the Ars Nova, or New Art, appeared. Composers started weaving multiple voices together, creating harmony. And, this was a huge deal, they started adding instruments. Music was taking its first baby steps away from being purely for God, and becoming something more human.
Now that new focus on humanity just exploded during the Renaissance. And if we look at our map again, you can see that creative explosion is what paves the way for the next 2 biggies, the Baroque and Classical eras. This is where music gets bigger, bolder, and finds this incredible new level of structure and feeling. But even as the music got way more complex, that connection to the divine was still there. For a giant of the Baroque period like Johann Sebastian Bach, every single complicated note, every beautiful harmony, it was all ultimately for a higher purpose.
Okay, so right after the Baroque period, music hits this major fork in the road and goes in 2 completely different directions. You can see the contrast right here. On one side, you have the Classical era. It's all about logic, order, and elegance. And in the other corner, you have the Romantic era, which is all about passion, chaos, and the feelings of the individual.
You know, the easiest way to get the classical era is to just think about Mozart. And I love this line from the book's forward. He was pretty much an 18th century pop star, an absolute prodigy, creating this stunningly beautiful music, but he was still working within the elegant, established rules of his time.
And then came the rule breakers. Glancing back at our map, we're now entering the Romantic era. And this is where the composer stops being just a skilled worker and turns into a kind of hero, pouring their own soul and struggles right into the music. And the ultimate hero of this era has to be Ludwig van Beethoven. This quote just says it all. He took the polite, orderly music of the classical era and just smashed it to pieces with raw emotion. His symphonies weren't just tunes. They were his life story, full of struggle, fighting back, and finally, triumph.
Beethoven basically kicked the door off its hinges, and all the composers who came after him just stormed right through. The ambition in the Romantic era was just mind-blowing. Think about the epic scores you hear in movies today. That all started here. Like Richard Strauss said, they weren't just writing music anymore. They were trying to build whole worlds out of sound.
And all of that untamed passion found its perfect home on the opera stage. The composer Verdi loved it for one simple reason. He called it reckless. It was all about huge emotions, bigger-than-life stories, and drama turned up to the max. Sound familiar? Okay, one last jump on our map. So, if the Romantics broke the rules, the composers in the 20th century decided there were no rules to begin with. Welcome to the modern era, a time of absolute musical revolution.
All of a sudden, anything was possible. You had composers writing music with no tune you could hum.
Those clashing, jarring chords became the new normal. Some people used dice rolls to write their music. Others recorded the sounds of machines or birds. The whole point was to challenge you, to make sure you never just sat back and listened comfortably.
And I think this quote from the composer John Cage just nails the whole spirit of the 20th century. It wasn't about being afraid of what was new. It was about being completely bored by what was old. The goal was to just explore and see what music could possibly be if you threw out the entire instruction manual.
So, from a single voice chanting to a massive symphony to a piece of music that was literally just silence, we've flown through 1,000 years of sound. And the real magic, as this says, is that the story never ended. It just kept growing and changing. So, why does any of this matter to you? Because this 1,000-year history isn't locked away in some museum. It's hiding in plain sight. That massive ambition of the Romantics? That's what makes the score to your favorite movie feel so epic. The clever patterns of Bach? They're buried deep in the DNA of pop songs you hear every day. This story is all around us.
So we've given you the map. We've shown you a huge, incredible world of sound. Maybe you're drawn to the pure, simple order of the early chants, or the raw power of a Beethoven symphony, or the weird, wild experiments of the modern age. The journey is yours now. The only question left is, where are you going to explore first?